This is the Pieta, and it's the last painting made by Titian. He painted this around the time that the plague struck in Venice, which not only impacted his life and life in Venice, but also ultimately led to his death. The painting was intended to hang above his grave in the Frari Chapel in Venice. He made an agreement with them so that his painting would hang above his grave, and in return they would allow him to be buried there. His wishes were not carried out due to some of the surrounding circumstances. Titian died, and his son, who was supposed to carry out his will, also died very shortly after that, both presumably from the plague. So instead of hanging in this intimate chapel, it hangs in the Gallery d'Accademia. Just like many paintings, it has been hung very poorly, so that it doesn't get a proper lighting. The gallery has certainly been infected with the virus of art ideals. There's a lot of skylight windows above the painting, which cause natural light to flood in and creates glare on the painting, so you can't really view it from the proper distance without a lot of glare. They also have some strange rules that you can't sit down and spend an extended period of time looking at one painting. You're supposed to just keep walking through the museums and kind of look at the paintings as you go. I wasn't aware of that rule, but I was sitting with some colleagues enjoying the painting. The guard started to approach us, so we just walked out of the museum and he essentially chased us out. It was quite a bizarre experience. The thing is that the museum wasn't even busy. There was really nobody there. We were the only people sitting there. So it doesn't make much sense for the guard to come and approach us and tell us that we shouldn't look at the painting. That was my experience with the museum, and it's a common theme among many museums around the world. The chapel where the painting was intended to hang would have been a much more suitable location. Regardless, the painting is fantastic. The Pieta is of course a very common motif. It was painted a lot throughout the Renaissance and beyond, and it's a very major biblical motif. Pieta, literally translated, means pity, and it is known as the compassion of Christ. It's one of the significant stages of Christ's life, where he has been pulled down from the cross, and now Mary weeps over his dead body. Even within the Pieta, there are different specific stages that could have been depicted. One popular example is the Pieta by Michelangelo, in which Mary alone mourns over Jesus' body. In Titian's Pieta, there are many more figures, but it maintains a high level of intimacy. In the middle, of course, is Mary holding Jesus' body. Closest to them, holding Jesus' hand, is another figure whose identity is less clear. It is commonly agreed that this aging man is actually a self-portrait by Titian. The biblical figure who he represents is debated. It's either Nicodemus or Saint Jerome. Nicodemus was the one who was responsible for getting Christ's body ready for the embalming so that he could be buried. I'm not sure why people think it would be Saint Jerome or what his relationship was to this story. I also don't think it's very necessary, because in many ways this story is really just about Titian. It's thought that the aging man is supposed to be Titian, and Christ is Titian's son Armature. It does seem apparent that Titian did personally care about this motif. So it's not far-fetched at all to assume that Titian basically depicted himself and his son. There's a small tablet in the right-hand side of the painting which depicts two figures praying to the angels. Supposedly that tablet is supposed to represent Titian and his son, who are praying to the angels to be spared from the plague. To the left of Christ is Mary Magdalene. She was a follower of Christ, and here she calls out in agony. It's unclear exactly what she's doing there. From what I read from historians, they say that she should either be just arriving at the scene or else running away from it. Personally, I've always thought it looks like she's calling for help, like she's throwing her arm up and saying, "Please get over here, we need help," or perhaps crying to the world from her pain and just yelling out. Above the two pedestals with the lions' heads, we have the statues of Moses on the left and the Hellespontine Sibyl on the right. That's known because their names are inscribed on the pedestals. Above Mary is a little cherub, or an angel, that flies with a torch. Something to note here is that the angel was actually added in later by another painter. Many historians have ridiculed late Titian for how unfinished he left his paintings. I think taking this as a case study gives a good example of how little he actually left unfinished. After Titian died, Palma Giovanni stepped in to finish the painting. He was a sort of student or a pupil of Titian, and according to his own words, there are very few changes that he made. He left an inscription that reads, "What Titian left unfinished, Palma with reverence completed and dedicated the work to God." His contribution was essentially limited to the torch-bearing angel, which he painted over top of an unfinished angel that was already placed there by Titian. So most of this painting is the work of Titian. And even where Palma painted on top, he actually said that he tried to the best of his abilities to imitate Titian's style. So that's quite interesting. He obviously had a great respect for Titian, and he was supposedly a part of his late workshop. Although the changes were quite minor, I do think they actually improved the painting, and in no way does it really degrade the painting overall. I've read and heard from many sources that the paintings of late Rembrandt and late Titian were left unfinished, that the both of them were going blind and lacked motor control so that they couldn't finish their paintings. But the truth is that their styles were very intentional, and that style exactly is what the art historians don't like. To them, it appears unfinished because they have different values and they have different goals than what these late painters did. What they claim to be unfinished is exactly what gives breath and life to the painting. It creates atmosphere, movement, and drama. The art historians would also say that the painters shouldn't even use black. It should come as no surprise that when I talk about the compositional structure here, my first thought is going to be about the golden armature strategy. It was very commonly used by Titian all the way through his last paintings. And you can also see that there's a sort of X that is formed in this painting as well. Another common strategy for creating movement in paintings. You'll notice there's a major line for this X that is formed all the way going from the statue in the background down through Titian's leg. The other X is this sort of combination of the cherub, the statue on the right, the empty space, Jesus, and also both of the Marys, and this little angel in the foreground that you don't really notice. In many ways, this painting is quite extreme, and one of the most outstanding aspects is the movement. This comes back to the story because it makes it feel very chaotic. Mary Magdalene looks frantic and troubled, and she appears in motion. The cherub up above with the torch is contrasting her with a dramatic movement in the opposite direction, as if he's pulling the light away from Christ. Something to learn from this movement is that Titian is maintaining the strong structure, which allows him to do all of this while maintaining a balance. If it wasn't for the angel and the strong contrast on the right side with the opposite movement from Mary Magdalene, then she would feel too extreme. Mary and the angel lean in a similar way with their bodies, but that doesn't matter for the sake of the balance. The important thing is that the major lines or movements balance each other out. So the X here helps to create a balance. While Mary's body leans to the right, all of the figures in the foreground and the central figures, as well as the statue on the left, creates this strong movement that goes up to the left. Mary Magdalene's hand and arm also pulls up that way. So it creates this sort of large triangle here on the left-hand side. Then you can see that there's a sort of reflection of that on the right-hand side, with the angel being the primary factor in creating that movement, as well as the manipulation of light so that we get this empty space, we get these shadows. Mary, as well as the bottom part of Mary Magdalene and this angel in the foreground, help to complete that triangle. The focus of the painting, of course, is going to be Mary, Christ, and the self-portrait by Titian. That becomes the inner circle and where you'll be able to find a focal point that you can actually choose to relax on.